So I will now want to welcome you to this launch event of the Making Sci Public program, which is, as you heard, funded by the Leverhulme Trust. And I can make this work. What I want to do is to talk you briefly through how the program came about, what it is about, and home in on some central concepts. But if you want to know more about the program, you can look into your conference packs, where we have all sorts of descriptions of the various research projects that are sort of under the umbrella of the program. And you can also, for example, read our blog, or you can read this blog written by Warren Pierce, who's one of our research fellows, and Sujata Raman, the deputy director of the program, which was recently published at the LSE Impact blog, Making Science Public as a Route to Better Evidence. So yeah, there are all sorts of ways for you to inform yourself about the program. Now, when the Leverhulme Trust sent out a program call called Science and Politics, now quite a few years ago, we thought, as the Institute for Science and Society, that we should respond to this call. And Professor Sarah O'Hara also told us that we should respond to this call. So we did. And we initially sat together and we thought, okay, there are various types of scientific controversies around, and they're almost eternal controversies, like the genetically modified food and crops debate, BSE, which now rears its head again under the banner of the horse meat scandal, in a way. The MMR vaccination controversy, which again still lingers on. Just on Sunday I heard that measles are up again in the UK, I think. And there are many other controversies you can choose from. Now, and I really simplify here totally, some people might think that these are only controversies because there are problems in science. The science is perhaps uncertain, unsound, unsettled, or whatever you can call it. So there's a problem with the science. Other people might think there's a problem with the public, or publics. The public doesn't understand the science, they don't accept the scientific evidence base, and so on. So there are two problems that need to be solved. So, again, simplifying very much, various solutions are proposed to these seeming problems. And some of the solutions that have come up over and over again in recent years are: we want to have more transparency in the science-making process, in the science policy-making process, and so on. We want to have more openness. We want to have more engagement and participation from the public with science, and science with the public. And we thought, yes, that's fine. But doesn't that also pose a problem? Are these solutions actually the right solutions, or are they generating more questions than they solve? And at the time, we thrashed about various ideas. And while writing this PowerPoint, I came across an old email written by Alex Smith, which I think encapsulated at the time quite well what we wanted to do. And this was to focus on, in a way, the contested ground that science already occupies, and which may be further unsettled by the efforts to intervene in order to make science more public. And I think that is actually the issue which we are grappling with. So we have various concepts, as I said, which are central to the program, such as opening up science, transparency in the science policy process, and so on, and engaging the public. Now, there are various issues around these which one could discuss in more than 15 minutes. So, regarding the opening up of science, one can ask, what does it actually mean in different contexts to put this advice into practice? Or, when you talk about more transparency, and I'll talk about this in a minute a little bit more, what are the consequences for different stakeholders in science and politics in making this process more transparent, and make science policy and so on more transparent? And when it comes to engaged publics, one can ask, what are the ethical implications for rethinking relations between science, polity, and publics? How should the public be engaged? Who should be engaged? What should be done? How should they be listened to? And so on and so forth. There are lots and lots of questions about that. And as people in this room will know, opening up science, the issues of openness, transparency, and so on, have been in the news for at least a year or two, increasingly, I think so. So, for example, the Royal Society published a report in 2012, Science as an Open Enterprise, illustrated by a genome map of the Spanish cucumber E. coli, which you can see there. Then RCUK organized a first international open data dialogue in 2012. I recently came across a web page on the Department of Health's website called Transparency, Data, Statistics and Transparency, also from 2012. And while this was going on in the summer of last year, I looked at the Royal Society report and the Open Data Dialogue report, and I wrote a blog about this around open data, trust, and visual literacy. And I think by this I refer, for example, to the genome map, which is very good visualization of the Spanish cucumber E. coli, and opens up this scientific issue to a wider public that can scrutinize this map. But the issue for me was actually who has the expertise to actually understand these data which are opened up to the general public. So there is an issue of expertise, literacy, and so on, which has to be addressed. Now, I'm not a scientist. I'm also not an expert in politics, so perhaps I'm the wrong person to do the science and politics program, but I can always fall back on my love for language and meaning, and so I'll look a little bit at some concepts which are central to the program, such as the concept of transparency. And my first port of call is usually the Oxford English Dictionary, and when you look at the entry for transparency, you'll find that it was first used in, at the turn of sort of 1590 to 1600, and refers to transparencies that convey the sunbeams, and transparencies by which means it receives the light. And these types of transparencies, you still remember from the time before PowerPoint when we used transparencies, make up the almost the whole entry in the OED. And there's not a lot of indication that the word transparency or has other meanings than this type of transparency that lets through the light. But when you look at, for example, something called the Bank of English, which collects all sorts of modern English usages of language use in various types of media, you can find that there is a shift of meaning, which I think you all know about, and this is just from British books. So you still find transparency in the sense of translucency, such as kind of vivid transparency, negatives or transparency, and then on the bottom color transparencies and so on. But there are other types of transparency issues creeping in. For example, a new era of transparency and traceability in the organic food chain, about transparency in the non-organic food chain, and so on and so forth. So different types of meanings are actually now being bandied about around transparency. When you look at the whole portrait of the word provided by the Bank of English, you'll find that it's used with verbs such as promote, enhance, improve, introduce, demand, increase, demonstrate, promise, encourage, provide, bring, require, and so on, which again takes us quite a long way away from sunbeams, I have to say. You also find adjectives like absolute transparency, total, fiscal, complete, corporate, financial, and so on. So the word seems to have shifted quite a lot. When you then look at the internet, at various sort of fora, discussion fora around transparency on normally organizational websites, you find people saying things like, I think of transparency as allowing citizens to see through the workings of government. In this way, they can investigate whether or not their leaders and organizations have met their expectations. The public is empowered by being brought into government's inner circles. And this is in a way also the type of meaning that was promoted by James Wilson and Rebecca Willis in a famous booklet called See Through Science. And so this is also the positive side of transparency. And again, I wrote a blog about see-through science, but that focuses on glass, which, if you want to read, glass is very important in science. And another issue of transparency. But then, when you look at other blogs and discussion fora, you find people saying things like, it's a lie. People just want to know more about you. And this type of dark side of transparency has been discussed by, oops, I did something wrong there, but anyway, social scientists. For example, Haridimos Tsoukas wrote an article in 1997 called The Tyranny of Light, which was about transparency in the information society. And Marilyn Strassen wrote another article along the same lines in 2000 called The Tyranny of Transparency. And then in 2013, Ivan Krastev, a political scientist, wrote an article called The Conspiracy of Transparency. And I found this actually on a tweet by Paul Hayward, so thank you. And he said things like, the idea that transparency will restore public trust in democracy rests on several problematic assumptions, primarily the belief that if only people knew, everything would be different. And that is an issue I think we can discuss extensively today. So, in my mind, to study the meanings of transparency properly, you would have to look at other words and other meanings around accountability and audit, measurement and surveillance, control and trust, publicity and secrecy, objectivity and neutrality, and something that for me I think will be, I think in my mind will become a big issue in the future, which I call big data and transparency overload. And I think that needs to be studied quite a bit. And again, I've written a little blog about big data, if you want to follow that up. Okay, but when I was writing the PowerPoint a few days ago, I came across this on Twitter. It's called the Sunshine Act in the United States with regard to healthcare transparency. And it means that doctors have to declare where they get their medical devices from, which companies they pay, and so on. And I just wanted to bring this in because it brings us back to the sunbeams. So that's enough about transparency. So there are other meanings in the words in the program which need further scrutiny, such as, for example, the meaning of public and publics. And again, when you look at the OED, you find, for example, that the adjective public means without concealment, which relates, again, to transparency, or belongs to the community or the nation, which brings us back to issues around engagement and so on. And again, that needs further study. Now, when I looked a bit more closer at the noun, public, I found that the plural publics, which I always thought was an invention by STS people, was already used in 1911, which was quite astonishing to me. But anyway, so when you think about the meaning of public or publics as a noun, again, you can have various types of meanings which are not listed in the OED, which I just made up, which I made up for this PowerPoint, but I think needs discussion, such as the public of democratic citizens, that's still in the OED, but also the public as a receptacle of information, which links to the deficit model, which STS people talk about, the public as co-producers of science and policy, which was counterpoint to this meaning, the public as a resource for science and policy trials, which is becoming an issue now around sort of introducing RCTs in policy making, for example. The public as a dialogue or engagement partner, as a market to be tapped, and this is something, again, which will be discussed today, I think, as a phantom, the public as a phantom, by which Lippmann said, and also the public as being summoned into existence for various purposes. And this is an issue that Sujata Raman and Nick Mahoney discuss in their work. So again, there are lots of things we have to do, but I hope that people around here can do it beyond the semantics, which is always where I stay, I think. And then finally we come to meanings of making science public, which chose this title because it was a catchy title, but it can have various meanings which might clash or lead to misunderstanding, and I think they have to be sort of brought out in the open. So It can mean something like science communication, which many people associate with making science public. It can relate to science as a public good, which Ulrike Feld will talk about. It can relate to science as visible and open to inspection, which again leads us back to transparency. And there are lots more interpretations of this title. And if you have the time and the inclination, you can send me your interpretations by email, and I would be very glad to get them. Now, the program itself is called Making Science Public, and it has 3 big sub-projects. I have to speed up a bit, I think. Transparency, science publics, engagement, and 9 sub-projects underneath that, which are already in the process of being merged internally. So the boxes are not boxes. We have links between them. We have various research fellows which have started to work for us, such as Adam Spencer, Judith Tsouvalis, Carmen McLeod, Warren Pierce, Sarah Hartley, and Steviana Desai, which I haven't met yet, but she must be around soon. So you'll meet all these people today. There will be a keynote and lots of improvisation today. Rob Glass will be filming the whole event, and if you have any objections to being filmed or have objections to being quoted, let us know. If you want to know more about the program, you can look at the blogs, the website, the Twitter account, and the hashtag for today is Making Science Public. Oh, Making Sci Pub, sorry. Okay, so I now want to hand over to Ulrike Feld.